Hello, everyone. My name is Davina Davidson, and I am a Houston-based Lululemon ambassador and a yoga teacher trainer, community leader. And I have been given the green light or the opportunity to connect with yoga teachers from all around the world so that we can hear their experiences as Black yoga teachers, Black yogis, as we know that our voices are not always heard in this particular community, nor are our faces often seen. So with that, I have Shawn J. Moore this morning, and I'd like to give him a moment to introduce himself and tell us how you want to be identified.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Davina, thank you again for inviting me into this platform. My name is Shawn Moore. I create sacred space for people to dive into an area of personal discovery and self-study. And I do that through a few different lenses, but in terms of how I like to be identified, my pronouns are he, him, and his.
I love that. Yeah. I'm being all politically and socially correct this morning. This is important. This is important.
It is.
Tell us, where are you from? Do you still live in the same place that you were born?
I do not. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, originally born in Texas, actually, in Abilene, Texas. Both of my parents were in the Air Force. So I was born there, grew up in Baltimore, and now I currently live in Atlanta. I've been in Atlanta for 6 years now. The time is flying, geez. I've been in Atlanta for 6 years.
Yeah, I went to Atlanta, I feel like it felt like for the first time in a long time anyways, in February, I'm gonna say February, March for the Essence Fest. It was like a wellness festival. And I was just in awe of the Black yoga community. It's solid. Coming from, and I know it's different when you live in it versus like someone visiting, but definitely compared to what we have working in Houston, it felt very welcoming and like everyone knew everyone. It was awesome.
Yeah, it definitely feels like that. I think there is compared to some of the other places I've typically visit, because anytime I visit somewhere, I'm immediately on the computer looking for like yoga studios and like different things like that, and then looking like who owns the studio or what's the makeup of the studio look like. And I will say in Atlanta, it does make it a little easier to really connect with yogis of color, maybe studios that promote that a little bit more and are really walking in that. So I definitely agree.
Oh, that.
It's one of the things I feel a little spoiled being here around that.
No worries. When did you take your first yoga class?
Wow. My first yoga class was actually when so I've had a long relationship with yoga before I probably even realized that what I was working with was yoga, right? I always tell people like my entry point has been meditation. And that's again before I realized like, oh, meditation and yoga are connected. It's a limb, it's all a part, right? And so I've been meditating back since high school. And ever since then, I was always excited looking for places or people that meditated, books, connecting to that. And so that gave me a space of my own level of like self-study. And then, undergrad, I would take, in college, there's always our fitness areas hosting yoga classes. So I've taken a few yoga classes there. Fast forward to 2009, 2010, graduated from undergrad. My best friend actually completed her yoga teacher training then. And so I was like, oh, okay, let me look a little bit more. I was like, this is something that's important to her. Let me learn a little bit more about what yoga is. And so from there, I would take a few yoga classes. And then when I moved to Atlanta, that's where I started to take my yoga practice a little bit more serious. So while I was here, I was like, cool, LA fitness classes are cool, YouTube classes are cool, but I kind of want to get into an actual studio and experience yoga from that perspective. And so always joke and say I did like a little Groupon hopping before I really invested into the studio that I felt like would be my kind of yoga home. So I was, you know, taking a few yoga classes. My thing that I really resonated with was Bikram yoga. And that kind of was my first real like consistent aspect of working with yoga. Was one of the studios here in Atlanta that was a Bikram studio. And then from there, I just was like, let me explore it and take all the yoga classes and all the styles and really like lean into the practice.
What's really funny is you said, you know, in college they have those, you know, fitness classes and then they have yoga. No, they don't. Okay, you're telling your age right now because
Well,
all universities do not have yoga, and my university did not have yoga until I left. But nevertheless, they have yoga.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's interesting that you resonated with Bikram. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think what I enjoyed about Bikram was the consistency of the practice. So when I was looking at, of course, entering yoga from a space of, oh, I was looking for a physical activity, right? Just leaning into the introductory of yoga being something very physical. For me, Bikram gave benchmarks to say, all right, this practice is consistent. I know that I got 15 minutes in without feeling like I'm dying. Okay, next week I got 20 minutes in, there's progress, right? It gave me a much more of a better baseline around feeling like there was accomplishment or feel like I was getting better at yoga, right? And so that's kind of one of the things that really resonated with Bikram at first. And then I was like, all right, maybe this fast-paced, hot stuff ain't always it. So let's look at some other practices like yin, you know, some slower, more restorative practices. But in the beginning, Bikram definitely resonated because of that, creating that benchmark of, all right, this feels like it's a little bit more progress in the practice.
Yeah, and which is counterintuitive to what yoga is about, but we don't know that, and that's the beauty of the practice is that we it meets us where we are, and then we learn and we navigate all the styles or the styles that resonate with us most. And from what I know of you, restorative and yin or the slower practice is home base for you. Yeah.
It is, and it's funny because I ran from those practices in the beginning, right? Like so in that kind of exploration, you know, I took some Bikram. I was like, okay, I like this. Let's put a bookmark here. I'm gonna revisit. Went to some other studios. One of the studios that prior to them closing that I worked at, Sacred Chill was one of those other studios, and I went and I was like, oh my God, this practice is so slow. What am I like? And my mind was running, my mind was racing, and I'm like, this is what nope, not doing this. And not realizing that was what I needed, right? Like knowing sometimes what we resist quite often is sometimes really what we need to lean into. Just made that circle back around to yin, the circle back around to restorative yoga, to sound baths and sound meditation, just like the thing that really realized like, oh, this was the medicine that I needed. And there was a reason why I was trying to run from it, because that stillness, I wasn't trying to listen to what was coming up in that stillness. So it's easier in some of those fast-paced practices that like, okay, I'm in tune with my body. Doesn't matter what's going on up here, but my body is sweating, I'm in motion. I was able to escape that a little bit in some of those maybe vinyasa or Bikram classes that I was really engaged in a little bit more.
How did those practices feel in your physical body? I know that in terms of Bikram, sometimes there's this tendency to hyperextend, putting more pressure on the joints. What was your experience of that? Like, could you disconnect from like this idea that yes, I'm getting a workout, but like this hurts, or like this I'm sore
First,
5 days after.
At first, no. And I think that's where I started to learn the lesson of mind your mat. Like, you know, of course, being in these yoga spaces sometimes, especially when you're in spaces, when I was at the Bikram studio that I was taking classes in, I was the only Black person there. And so for me, there started to become a little bit more of a like competition, paying attention like, okay, she's extending further over this way. Let me extend a little further. Let me bend my knee a little bit more. Let me push myself. And in that, there were a lot of lessons that came up around that. And that made me realize that I valued places that really paid attention to body types and really understanding and being able to teach to the person in the room or the people that are in the room. And that's one of the things as I was experiencing yoga, I'm like, okay, I get that's the asana, but how does it work in this big black body, right? Like how can I get into that? What's the compromise with the posture in that? And so some places that I was going, that wasn't really a conversation. It was like, this is it. You need to get into it. Oh, you didn't get into it. We're moving to the next posture. And so in my exploration, I started to value that a little bit more in spaces where there were more conversations around how can we transition your style, your type into the particular posture or asana that they were sharing with us that day.
Yeah. Okay. I got one last thing because I just want to throw it at you, and I really want to see. I just want to shake it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Comedic yoga. I know that at Sacred Chill, Ona Hawk taught Comedic Yoga there. I'm not sure if you were working there at the time that she taught there. How does that practice feel in your body? Because there's a teacher here in Houston who teaches it. And in my experience, it's not an alignment-based practice, but it is an alignment-based practice. So I'm wondering, did you ever get into Comedic, and how did it feel in your body?
So I haven't taken a Comedic class in person. I've taken classes with yogi teachers who have practiced it, so you can see the integration in, and it definitely feels much more energetically aligned than it does like physical alignment. And it's something that I really enjoyed about that process, that it was definitely a much more focused on maybe the energy lines in the body versus like, are you physically there? It's like, nah, can you feel that you're there? And I enjoyed that. Amazing teacher. Like I love her energy. And so, yeah, it's definitely very energetically focused in that way.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah. Well, in your experience of practicing, because, Atlanta does have a large population of Black yogis. You mentioned that in your first or in an experience, you were the only Black person in class. How did that play out as you continue to explore the different styles and maybe different studios? Did you see more Black people in classes? Or did you continuously in certain parts of the city only see, like you were the token? What's your experience been like?
It's been, that exploration was, I don't want to say difficult, but yeah, may have been a bit of a difficult exploration because it's like you're thinking about the practice itself, and then you're also thinking about just the dynamic of the studio and how does it feel to be in the studio, and is it welcoming? Am I getting looked at sideways because I'm here and I'm taking up space in the studio? And so it's been a bit of a real actual journey. Like, there were spaces that I went and I was like, oh, I got a 30-day thing on Groupon and I'm exploring, and I'm like, may not last the whole 30 days. I think just the 2 or 3 days was fine because it's a little hostile of an environment. And so that gave me space to just, really hone in and appreciate when I found certain studios like Sacred Chill, like 7 Yoga here in Atlanta, that it allowed me to really realize, I was like, oh, this is real community. This is what it means to be around or be taught by folks that look like me, folks that take my identity into into the space and really make me feel like I'm welcome into the space. So I think once you start to find a home base or find your home studio, it really makes you think about the relationship you have with other spaces. Because I always tell folks, so I work in Morehouse as an educator, and I always have a lot of students that will ask me about meditation, ask me about yoga, and they always like, well, I would like to experience it, but I don't see people that look like us doing it. And I tell them, I said, it's an investment, so take the time to explore a space that makes you feel comfortable, right? Because if it's something that I'm going to invest in a membership, I'm going to invest in my time and energy being into this space. Is it a space that if you're coming to yoga to find yourself and to really be centered, are you dealing with other layers the minute you walk into that studio or that space, right? And so, that's been one of the biggest pieces of advice I like to give folks, is just really think about and do your research and see how it really feels being in those particular spaces. Because, you know, no one wants to feel like that. If you're coming in yoga to really do some internal work, or if you're coming into like, I'm trying to stretch it out because it's been a hard day, you don't want that extra layer to be added on top of what that experience should be.
What's interesting in working myself working with white studio owners here in Houston, during this time I've done some sessions just talking through these kinds of experiences, because one, they often say, well, no one has shared of the type of experiences that you're talking about, or that layer that you're talking about. Can you break that down a little bit more? Like, what is it, or what's some examples of what it feels like to be in a hostile yoga setting, or like having that kind of experience?
Yeah, and I would say a lot of that is maybe microaggressions. A lot of it are things that, and one thing I've noticed about studios is it might not be the owners, right? It might not be the teachers, but it might be the rest of the community that is maybe enacting some of those microaggressions, right? There, you know, I've been in spaces where I walk in, of course, only Black person in the space, and it's almost like the yoga equivalent to someone clutching their purse a little tighter, where it's like, let me move my stuff over. And it's like, it's all this space in here you needed to feel like you had to move over, right? So it's stuff like that make you feel like, after a long day of work, I came here to do some yoga, and that's what I get met with. Or just questions around, you know, oh, this must be your first time here. It's like, well, I actually teach yoga too. You know, it's those kind of things. It's like, well, you know, and you get those kind of questions, or people feeling comfortable enough to want to try to correct you, where you are in a space where you're like, oh, no, I understand the asana that she called out. I'm doing what feels good for me on my body and my mat. Thank you, though. So it's things like that that can be a bit hostile for people of color coming into these spaces, because it automatically almost puts you on a defense, right? In a space where you feel like you should be able to relax and just be yourself on your mat. You automatically get, you know, you can feel it in your body, right? You feel tight, you feel constricted in a space where you should be able to just kind of release some of that. And so that's been some of those have been exact examples of things that I've experienced, where it's like, thank you for your help, but I kind of didn't ask. Mind your mat and stay over there. But yeah.
One of I got like excited, or just like, oh, you too? It was like I had a Me Too moment of one of my friends who owns a studio, and I'm sure she's like, please stop telling this story, Davina. It's the truth though, and like, it is real. It happened multiple times where I went to go practice, and my mat was already set up, like my mat's laid out, and on two different occasions, two older white women, because it's not the studio owners, it's not the teachers, but it's the members in the community, where one lady asked me, she literally asked me, she said, can you move your mat so I can practice here? I really like being by the window.
I've had that happen. I've had that happen too.
I said, you know what? Sure. And moved my mat and didn't think, this woman was 60 plus. I said, okay, sure, move my mat. And on the second occasion, I went to the other side of the room by a wall, and this woman and her husband walked up, and she said, I really like to be by the wall. Can you scoot over a little bit so we can fit right here by the wall? And I mean, there was not enough space for both of them to fit by the wall anyways, but it was just like, no, do you see this whole room? Like, I'm here. Like, I'm here. And so, yeah, that I've had similar experiences of the whole, like, moving your mat. It's like, what? No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, you also mentioned being a yoga teacher. When did you do your teacher training?
Sure. So I always say I kind of came into the world backwards. So my first kind of foray into the space was actually my sound healing training and apprenticeship. After that, I did Yoga Nidra teacher training certification. And those were about 2 years ago. And then actually I did my YTT this year. So for me, it was really leaning into, when I realized that those stillness practices, I had always been thinking about this, right? Like I knew I wanted to share these practices with people that look like us, right? But I was also trying to figure out which way felt most organic and most, for me, the lens in which I felt like was most impactful. And so when I realized and leaned into, I was like, oh, I experienced my first sound healing session maybe like 3 years ago. It was like a fundraiser, raising money for social workers to actually experience sound healing to help them with the work that they do. And so I went to that fundraiser, experienced it, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. How do I do this? How do I lean into this practice? And so that kind of started that journey. And so this year I knew that I wanted to lean into yoga a little bit more from a perspective of how can I now better utilize maybe a few asanas to get people grounded for their stillness practices. So that's when I was like, okay, I'll pull in the YTT aspect of it, the yoga teacher training part. So actually this year, and those practices maybe about 2 or 3 years now, working with some of those. But yeah, for me, it's really looking at, let's move the body real quick so that we can get you grounded and ready to just really receive what's coming up in those stillness practices.
Mm-hmm. And that's the truth. That's one of the reasons why in yoga we tend to start with the physical practice, because if we ask someone to sit down and meditate for 5 minutes, it's like, can't, like I'm moving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't sit still. And so I think that that's a wonderful compliment to the meditation and the sound healing aspect, is to get some movement in first, and then rest. Take rest. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the students that attend your classes or that you see virtually, what's the demographic? What's the makeup of the people who are coming to your practice?
I would say one of the things that I've noticed, I would say, so maybe for in person, it was definitely a lot more Black folks joining a lot of those sessions. And I think for me, that was intentional, particularly for some of the spaces in which I was interested in definitely teaching and kind of building community in and with. I would say since it's been virtual, it's been a lot more of a diverse group. And I think that's just the reach of being virtual, and we're not confined to, hey, I'm in the city limits of Atlanta, but I can check out a sound bath for somebody in Australia, or a yoga class for somebody that's in London or Canada. But it's been a lot more diverse in that way now. But for me, I still keep that lens of how do we center the space for Black and brown folks, no matter who is actually in the space. So even some of the readings I'll pull from, some of the quotes I'll use for my classes will definitely center around kind of our experience a little bit more, with the idea that it's open for everyone. Just know that this is what you're gonna get in this session and in this class today.
You're gonna learn today.
You're gonna learn today. And I think it's important to keep that as kind of part of your voice in your classes, of understanding if your demographic, you're speaking to a very specific demographic, make sure that it's still catered there. Now, if other people want to be in and learn and partake, that's cool. But for me, it's been really important to kind of keep that at the center in those particular spaces, and not feel weird about that.
Yeah, you mentioned a word that I think is almost unheard of today in today's yoga world, and I think people think they don't need it, which is apprenticeship. Can you tell us a little bit about your apprenticeship with your teacher? Do you want to tell us who your teachers are? Like who?
Yeah, absolutely. So for sound healing, I did that program through Sound Embrace, Danielle Hall, and then for when we move over into meditation, yoga nidra, that's been Tracy Stanley. Amazing teachers. And for me, I think it's really important to be a continuous learner, right? That I think, and it's also like the educator's hat too, right? We think about like there's always continuous training, continuous learning. But for me, it's important to not only, yes, you can get a lot in a weekend training immersion or a few weeks training, but to really know how to fine tune that and say like, hey, I've held a class. Now let me reconvene with someone that is also holding that body of knowledge to have a deeper conversation around that, I think is really important. And so for me, that's always been something that's been really important, whether it's through an apprenticeship or a mentorship program, of really leaning into a lot of vessels of knowledge around that to be able to, you know, learn more and just kind of bounce ideas as they're coming up. So I always advise anyone, I was like, and for me, one of the things that's been important, I was talking to my best friend about this, is like finding that teacher that resonates with you, and really figuring out how you can connect with them from that perspective. And that's one of the things I've been excited about in this process of being able to really connect with, like Tracy. I just finished her mentorship. She had like a 3-month mentorship program. And that was amazing, because the things that I'm learning, not just about meditation, not just about yoga nidra, but about the business side of it, right? About specifically, we're in a space where we're all thinking about how do we engage differently virtually, right? To be at a space where I can ask someone who's at a different level in the work about like, well, what did the contract look like when you're engaging with this company? Or like, what did it look like? Or does this kind of deal make sense if they're reaching out to you? And getting that real kind of wisdom, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a needed, I think, mentorship and apprenticeship, especially right now where we have 50 million people going through these virtual 200-hour trainings. I think that, and it's wonderful to hear this from a Black person, to hear this out of your mouth, like apprenticeship, mentorship. It's nice to have these conversations, because sometimes we checklist the thing like, oh no, I did the training, I'm good. And we like, I got this. And I do know some teachers who pick up sound bowls and they don't have the training, and they don't have the training, and they don't have the mentorship piece to be going back and forth with someone. And it's I've recovered from a concussion a couple of years ago. And in that process, it was said to do sound healing, like to do sound healing work. And I went to a teacher's class and it sounded like just clinging. And I said, no. I mean, I literally was clenched the entire class. It was only in Shavasana that I was able to completely unwind. And I was like, the only reason why I didn't walk out is because I know your feelings would have been hurt, because people get like that when I leave their class. But that is like, it's dangerous. I'm like, that's not, to me, sound healing is beyond like a vibe. And like get my chakras and my crystals and my sound bowls. Like it is beyond that. Can you look?
Yeah, I'm a little triggered. Yes, because I think it's really important, especially for something. Physical asana, I think, is definitely important. There's alignment. There's all those kind of things that come in there where you can physically injure somebody if you're not thinking about what that looks like, right? But even when it comes to sound healing, people do think it's something as simple as I'm picking up a bowl and I'm just going to clank on this bowl for 30 minutes and say that's a sound healing session, right? I think one of the things that's really important is really to know, like, there's science behind it. There's a lot that goes into sound healing and how you can effectively hold space in that way. And so I'm always kind of weary when I do see people that just kind of pick it up and it's just kind of like, you know, that could really hurt somebody, right? Like, are you thinking about things about like women in their third trimester of pregnancy? Like, you shouldn't do sound healing, right? There are certain things that it's like, if you have thrombosis, you shouldn't do sound healing, right? There are certain things about the practice that I think we have to hold with, and I just think with meditation, yoga, sound healing, it's like we have to hold them on a level of integrity, because we're really affecting people and working with people on a lot of different levels, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, energetically. And so I think looking at mentorship, looking at apprenticeship, knowing that you have to be a continuous learner in this space, I think really allows us to really do the work to our fullest capacity. It's one of the reasons, like for me, I'm always like, I'm looking online, I'm like, who got a class, who got a workshop, even if it's just to learn a different teaching style, or like, oh, well, that's how you opened your class today. That's interesting, right? Or it's like, you played the bowls this way, or you started your meditation or ended your meditation this way. Always gives us opportunities to really think about how we are holding our practices, gives us space to really reflect on how we're holding space as teachers. And so I always tell people, like, take a class, take a workshop. And now it's like, it's no excuse now, I almost feel like, because we have the access, right, to take someone like, oh, someone lives in Houston and I always admired their classes. Let me take one of their trainings or their immersions. Someone lives in London and I've been like, damn, I'd like to get to London to take a class. You could still do it, right? It makes it, I think now it gives us the space to really lean a little bit more into how do we stay engaged as continuous learners in spaces as yogis.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm back to it. I'm appreciative that you're an educator and you're sharing from this perspective, because I do know people who are fitness trainers or who have different backgrounds, and they come to yoga as a checklist of like, okay, now I teach yoga, it's a trend now, and don't necessarily put in the extra work to keep people safe, which I think we can only do that to a certain extent. But there's something, a phrase that you said, and I've been picking at it for, I don't know, the last couple of months, and it is this idea of holding space. And it's like, what the heck does that really mean? Like, can we talk about it? Like, I have my own, and personal interpretation, but then I say it myself, and then I hear someone else say it, and I say, no, we're not holding space the same. So what does it mean to hold space, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think holding space for me means, I think it leans into the intention you're setting for the space in which you're holding, and it's also the tools that you're bringing into the space to really be supportive of the people that are coming into that space. And when I think about that, of course, when we think about the intention, it's like, well, what do you want people to walk away with from this particular thing? And again, an educator, right? Think about learning outcomes and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, what is it that if someone comes to this, they're walking away from this interaction from this perspective, right? But it's also thinking about how do you keep your tools sharp for that space, right? And so that's where, for me, the continuous learning comes in. It's like, I can hold space and I can have the best intentions to say that, my intention for you coming into a sound bath is I want you just to relax and heal. But when I think about my tools, it's like, am I able to facilitate in the best way that helps you in that level of healing, right? And so it's like, how do I keep those tools sharp? I keep those tools sharp because it also gives me the ability to learn and continue to grow in that particular way, so that I'm now bringing that to the table. And so keeping those tools sharp doesn't always mean training. Training should be in there, right? Apprenticeship, mentorship should be in there. But then it's like also keeping your tools sharp. What does your personal practice look like?
Amen.
What does your personal practice look like? Like, are you taking the time to ground yourself before you start? Do you have a consistent practice, or are you trying to get your yoga practice, your meditation practice in while you're teaching, right? People do that, right? People do that. Are you reading, right? Are you taking in new things, or is it just something that you're doing like, oh, I'm gonna pick up this book and I'm gonna just turn to a page at the beginning of class and pull out a quote to read? Like, are you actually internalizing the books that you're taking? So for me, it's about the intention that you're setting in the space, and then it's also how are you keeping your tools sharp to be in support of the people that you're in contact with.
You better preach.
When you asked, I was like, okay, let me.
We're gonna snippet that little piece and share it. We're gonna share that part. The last thing that I want to cover before we open it up for questions is, I love to see a Black man teaching yoga. That is there's just something very special about that. And every Black males class that I've ever been to, like, I have felt held and kept. Like, whether their teaching was the most anatomically correct and sound or not, that's not the point. But them standing in their fullness and choosing to share this practice, it lands a little different. Can you speak on your experiences of being a Black male yoga teacher in terms of your experiences, whether it's having white students, maybe you've had some experiences there, or having students with Black women and their experience with you, their appreciation or lack thereof of you. Do you have any stories that you'd like to share?
One of the things I think that, as you mentioned that, I would say it's been an experience that's been reaffirming. I would say that maybe there's been hesitation around people getting to my class around, I've gotten some people's like, oh, it's a Black guy teaching, or it's I've gotten that in conversation. But I think when people get into the space, I've always gotten a lot of appreciation for how I've been able to hold space, particularly kind of to your point of like feeling like it's a space to be held. And so that's one of the things that, like, when I've heard that, it only makes me want to figure out how to just be more in service of folks in that way. So it's like, how can I be more intentional? How can I really make the experience that much more immersive for people, if that is what people are getting from the space? And so it also, I don't want to say makes me feel good, because I don't think that's the way to go about it, but it also is reaffirming that my intention in the space is really being seen in that way. And so for me, it's always about when I'm holding space, sound healing, yoga nidra, yoga, for me, it's like, this is a space for you to do the work on your mat in your space, to really start to tap into your own voice, mm-hmm. right? No matter what it is that you have going on, we're all walking on a lot of different journeys. And so I want the space that we share to be a space in which you can really listen to your own internal voice. And so when I hear people echoing that afterwards, it's almost like, okay, it's like, whew, the intention was met in that way. And so that's really, when I can see that my intention and their intention and what they're getting out of it really aligns, for me, that's where I'm much more excited about really sharing space in that particular way for folks.
Yeah. Well, I try to push and encourage more of my my Black male friends to experience yoga, and because I think that they need it, it's needed, and to step up into leadership if that's what they are and who they are. If they are a leader, then I'm like, yes, get your yoga teacher certification and share with the people. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, well, let's transition to questions. Awesome. Does anyone have questions for Shawn during this time? And you can just type your questions in the chat. And as they are typing their questions in the chat, Shawn, do you have anything coming up that you'd like to plug? Where can we find you? What's going on in your world?
Yes. You can find me. I'm very active on Instagram, probably more than Twitter or Facebook. So you can find me at ShawnJ_Moore. My website is ShawnJMoore.com. I have meditations up on meditation and sound baths on Insight Timer, Yoga International, YouTube. And then I have a few classes I have coming up. I'm excited to be a part of the Stars and Melanin Yoga Project collaboration coming up. Really excited about that. So thank you. I also have a yoga nidra and sound meditation experience called Deep Reverence on October 11th, also coming up. And then in December, the first weekend of December, we'll be doing following back up with our intro to energy healing and sound healing workshop for folks who may be a little bit more interested in how to integrate the sound healing aspect. So you're not out here clanking the bowls, having people
don't do that.
It's a good immersion. It's an afternoon immersion in learning just a little bit about the foundations and some of the theoretical perspectives that come into energy healing and sound healing and how you can utilize that. This first part is around how to utilize that for a personal practice. And then the second part will allow you to be able to facilitate for other people in that way.
I love that. I love it. Doing all the things.
Trying to do the things, out here in these streets.
In these streets. Listen, that cover or the art on your Deep Reverence is mesmerizing. Like, I can just look at that all day long. Like, what is that? Is that a flower?
I just was in there just creating, and I just kind of a creative exploration. I don't know. Left it up for interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah, you know.
Okay. Cool.
These practices help with the creative process too. So, you know.
I love that. All right. Has quarantine revealed anything new for you around your purpose in the yoga space and as a Black leader? Jason be coming in hot with the questions.
Yeah, I see. Ooh. Quarantine has been super revealing. It has been a reaffirming space that my pivot out of education full time needs to come sooner so that I can lean into this space full time. That's been probably the biggest lesson in that, is that, yeah, working. I love education, right? I love the work that I've been doing from a career perspective since I've graduated from undergrad. I've been working in higher education in 10 or 11 years now. And what I realized is that I knew that education, or being an educator, was kind of my purpose. But what I've been noticing over the last few years, and then quarantine just really like peeled the layers back, is that education doesn't necessarily need to happen in the confines of a college or university, right? And the work that we technically are doing in this space is educational work, right? That, you know, when we think about a good professor, a good educator, their job is to bring the resources in and hold space for people to do the learning and do the work for themselves. It's the same thing that I feel like we're doing here in the yoga space. And so it's just been a much more of a reaffirming space to know that this pivot's coming, and it's coming soon.
I mean, that definitely resonates with me. That's kind of where I was after being in the education system for 10 years. It was like, and what's next? And I'm an educator at heart. So the setting changed, right? Like, I'm not teaching 8th grade math anymore, and I'm not, you know, or I'm not teaching algebra anymore, but I'm still teaching. And it's just in a different setting. Once a teacher, always a teacher. This is for sure. This is for sure. Cool. Well, it looks like we were thorough enough this morning that we don't have any additional questions. So I'm not going to keep you. I just want to say thank you so much for choosing to be a part of this and to share your story. I always consider that we don't know where this conversation will land. We'll share snippets of the videos and things like that, and you never know who you will impact. And so I think it's important to just say thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and your perspective. It's valid, it's valued, and it is important. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for spearheading this kind of this project. You know, we talked about it before we got started, but listen, thank you. You know, the universe puts people in each other's paths for a reason. And so I just want to say thank you for everything that you are doing. I know we talked about holding space, the way you hold space for people, the way you pull people in and pull people up. It's noticed, it's seen, and it's appreciated. And so thank you, Davina.
Yeah, well, thank you. Peace and blessings. You have a great rest of your Sunday. And I will see you on the mat or like in one of your sound healing sessions. All right. Thank you all for being a part of this experience. We really appreciate you being here. Do tune back in this afternoon at 5 p.m. We have Dara Like Sarah from New York coming in hot with all the good juice about what it's like being a yoga teacher in New York. All right. So we will see you all later. Peace.